traditional territory of the Sinamut people. So we do have an addition to the agenda under 8.4. We're going to be discussing the Transportation Administration Policy and recommendations arising from the 2017-2018 bus route review. This is the first year that we're doing sort of a comprehensive review of the bus routes. They've looked at all of the routes and they're making some recommendations for next year. So that'll be item 8.4. Are there any other additions, deletions, or changes in order to the agenda from anyone? Yes.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Trustee Office.
Yeah, so just as a point of information, so we put that on the business committee for November.
Yes.
I think you were away, yes. And so we were going to punt it off until December, and we forgot it.
We didn't have a meeting in September.
Oh, I mean, sorry, December. Did we not have a?
We didn't meet in December.
Oh, we didn't meet in December. Anyway, the agenda setting committee thought it would be best to discuss and close. And we're having it closed at the end of the month, so if that's suitable, we'll cover that then. Any other additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda? Seeing none, any objection to the approval of the agenda? Agenda is approved unanimously. Looking to approve the minutes for November 15th, 2017. Any corrections, additions, comments? Any objections to accepting the minutes as they are? Seeing none, those are accepted. We have no presentations for tonight, and so we'll move right into 8.1 and hear from Superintendent Blaine regarding information sheet for the amended 2017-2018 budget.
Thank you, through the chair. So I will be coming back to page 6 and 7 in your package in a moment. So I wanted to set a little bit of the picture for the amended budget that you will be seeing in the month of February. Ms. Sutton and Ms. McVeigh will be presenting the line items and et cetera for the amended budget in preparation for the ministry, sending into the ministry by the end of February. So in preparation for the amended budget, in review, we went back and looked at last year's budget. And if Mr. Prevost would just put up the first piece that I'd just like to present to you. If you recall, during the budget process last spring, we established basically a status quo budget that would deal with all the operations and et cetera for staffing and et cetera. And out of that budget, we identified that we may have some extra monies due to increased enrollment and et cetera. And so we also identified at that time that we may have some money to spend on some new initiatives. And last year also, different departments presented to the board in what they've been doing and some of the data and their longer term goals. In those goals were included, we filtered out through staff and the management the top priorities for the district as to the new initiatives. And so the first part of my report is just going to speak to the initiatives that were inputted into the budget at that time and where they are. So you'll notice, and I'm going to read from mine and hopefully they're in the same order. We had an HR initiative, and at that time it was $30,000, and we were actually redirecting that money within because at that time we hadn't got it done. Communications, we looked at an increase in advertising, which is in progress. The bottom line is, as I go through all these, is that there's only 3 or 4 of about 25 initiatives that are not in progress or completed. There are some small initiatives that we've redirected some monies to, and I'll speak to maybe those. We've increased our online presence to improve professional development in the communications department and for themselves. In the HR department, we added effectively release time for bargaining preparation and training. In learning services, we added to secondary staffing to the leads of 1 FTE, lead secondary. Increase FTE in vision, hearing impaired at that time to increase that. We completed another year as sexual health coordinator into it. Appoint 2 to Bayview under learning services, Fairview for school counseling. We added counseling to those 2 schools. In HR, again, we managed projects effectively with some MS software. Asset management, disposal and acquisition, under facilities, there was some monies, 75,000 put into that. Additional FTE and a carpenter at that time, and the cost of that, 1 full FTE. Top dressing and etc., we felt there was imperative, $50,000. And under the transportation department, we added 0.5 in casual cartage. In IS, we added 20 hours of a 12-month employee. Active Directory under IS, office migration, server backup, servers at schools, digitized paper records. Those were all of about $100,000 each that we spent money on, and all of those are in progress. The inventory for budgets, management of technology and assets, another $50,000. Network budget and secondary school labs, another $200,000 and $350,000 worth of initiatives there. SCC impacts were strategically managed, and we put some money into that at that time. Recruit and training of teachers, we added SCC money into our recruitment in anticipation of increased teachers of $150,000. SCC impact strategically managed and documented, another $124,000. And these are all monies that we were paying up front that were not included in the SCC overhead or any of the monies coming to us from the ministry. Supplemental training over budget amounts, SCC and BCPC and training related pieces, $10,000. Transportation account or department addition of 0.5, oh sorry, that's a repeat. A 0.4 of FTE of an electrician was added to the complement of facilities. The addition of 169 FTE plumber. Sorry, that's a 0.169 of an FTE plumber. Addition to a 1.0 FTE of caretaker at the time. An addition of 0.83 of a trim crew. Most of that was all connected to SCC, so that would be the increase of buildings and etc., building used by students. And then we also had under the IS department the addition of 2 carts for 15 schools of iPads, so raising up our primary usage, primary school K-3 with iPads. So I'm very happy to suggest to you that 90% of all the work and the funds are being utilized and used out there, and all aligned to the work that we're doing and the district goals.
So I'm going to interrupt you just for a second here, because I see some people frantically looking through their package for the sheet that you were just
we'll supply that to people if they request it. It was more of a point of I wanted to acknowledge the process that occurred to get us here, because it will link directly into what we're going to suggest here. Okay. So if any of the audience wants it, we can supply it. So the next piece, So the next piece is that there were budget strategies that we were not able to complete, and they were put onto a waiting list that in preparation for the amended budget. So now that we're into the amended budget process, management and our administrative council went through the list of budget initiatives and strategies that were on the waiting list, and we reduced that count and pulled and prioritized off of that list up to another group of top priorities that we would like to try to implement if there's any monies over the surplus piece. So utilizing that process as we identified, and I'm going to speak about the identification of some surpluses in a moment, but utilizing that process, we had a prioritized list of the budget initiatives that were established from the budget process last year. And then we also went through a shortened process of departments being able to present to us an immediate issues that have resulted over the last 6 or 8 months that were not identified last year during the budget process, and those were brought forward as well. So the point being is I think we did a thorough work on identifying what the initiatives, if there were monies left over. So bringing us to the business committee tonight is more of a high-level conversation before the Secretary Treasurer and the Department of Finance presents to you in February about what's been transpiring with our budget. So in reference back to page 6 on your handout, there were basically 6 areas that we saw surpluses, significant surpluses in, that we're reporting to the board. And the division out of these areas you could classify as some risk factors, and I'll speak to that in a moment. So under in the 6 areas were the classroom enhancement funds that I'll speak to, increased enrollment, reduction in teacher average salary, decrease in benefits and municipal pension premiums, operating budget adjustments, and the Aboriginal education rollover. So the first piece around classroom enhancement funds are the funds that were given to us by the ministry to support the implementation of the existing contract of 2002. And the classroom enhancement fund was a total of $12 million, $551,000. And so the intent of that money was to cover the staffing and any of the overhead that was required for us for that implementation. As you're well aware that we weren't able to fill all the positions at the beginning of September, so there were positions that may have started in October, positions in November. There are positions starting in semester 2 for second semester. So those all require, there's a savings that occurs there naturally because we're not paying out the entire FTE allotment that was given to us. There's also, these proposals were presented to the ministry last spring, and there were some updates that were made over the summer and the fall, but the majority were last spring, and so those projections shifted and changed as we began the implementation. That also resulted in some unspent funds. And I want to be specific that these are unspent funds that are needed by the district to return. So there's a risk factor involved in, as we identify this particular amount of funds, that it's more about that we should put it aside and ensure that we're ready to return all of it or some of it. So the best, it's like we don't want to go to our savings account too quickly to spend money that we may have gotten from somewhere else. So the recommendation under this is that approximately $1.2 million is recommended that we put in a separated out. Now it's a quarterly allotment or payment scheme from the ministry or process from the ministry, and so as you go through the budget, the amended budget next month, it won't show. We will identify it separately out for you so you know what it is, but it won't show up in a line item, is my understanding so far as we're working through the process. The next place you might be curious about is the revenue related to enrollment and the additional per pupil funding for 303 students, as you're aware, we received in September. So that increase is about $1.97 million in total. Most of the enrollment funding increase was spent on new staffing and support to students in classrooms. But a little over, as you're aware, 10% would be reflected as supplies and resources for schools that were allocated. There are some funds that will be spoken about in a moment as just the acquired surplus that will fall into our discussion for tonight. The third piece is the reduction of teacher average salary. So as you're aware, we brought in 107 FTE of teachers into the district under the SCC. The majority of those teachers are far under the average age of our teachers in the existing system. And there's a formula that's created by the ministry to adjust each district if you have an aging population or a young population, and that is affected by your, the monies you receive in September 30. The finalization of some of those calculations have not been completed. We have some preliminary information that suggests that we're going to come in quite a bit under what our average has been in the formula. And under that formula, it's probably going to generate about $1.9 million. Now, those are again monies that have risk factor involved because we have not completed the entire evaluation and analysis, and the ministry hasn't given us the final pieces to it. Until we see next year's funding and some of the block funding formulas, we can't really speak to that. So again, we're suggesting through this process that we will put that aside as potential funds that the board can make a decision to if they're still with us. As you can well imagine, if many of the school districts went down in their teacher average salary piece, there's a significant amount of money provincially in that. And as we all know, that sometimes things do get clawed back and et cetera. So we do have some concerns around that. It would be nice to see that kind of money come to us. So we've identified it. We're suggesting we put it aside and not to be discussed at this point in time with the amended budget. I know that CUPE has raised an issue in the past, over the last little while around the decreased benefits in municipal pension premiums, and we've had a discussion with CUPE around this. And I know Ms. Sutton has been working a lot on this. So there's another piece of our benefit packages being reduced in the present, and we did present this, and it's been under our radar for potential impacts, and I'm just going to start. The changes include an increase to extended health premiums due to the transition to the provincial standardized plan, an increase in EI and WorkSafe premiums, and a decrease in MSP and the municipal pension premiums. So when you work all that through, again, we're suggesting that there could be a potential $700,000 worth of savings to the district. And it's not just in one employment group or plan, it's in a few. Again, there's a risk factor involved as that works itself through, and we're again suggesting that we put that in safekeeping until we solve that, and that could come. Whenever we say that it's in safekeeping, it will come out possibly in the surplus for the final year, but at this point in time, we're not recommending we spend that. Number 5 is the operating budget adjustment. So as we work through staffing, and as you're aware, we are preparing for second semester now, we have identified that we are, in our contingencies within our operating budget, we have 10 extra FTE. And so out of this 10 FTE, we are suggesting that that is money that can be spent in the operating budget at this point in time. Extra from the operating budget of what's in there already operating the school district. So therefore, staff has removed the 10 surplus divisions from operating, netting an additional $1 million, and it's suggested that we spend these monies on the budget structure, which I'll come back to in a moment. So the final question that has been out there is the Aboriginal education rollover. And the explanation is that there was a significant rollover in Aboriginal education over the last 2 years in accumulation. Again, the accumulation comes from irregularities in staffing. Sometimes they can't fill a position right away, and so the money that would be spent, the money when it's not filled becomes into surplus. There was an additional number of students in each year that raised up, an unanticipated number of increase in it. And then we did have a rollover that we knew about, but we weren't sure where we were going to spend it. So you put that all together, it came out to about $636,000. So this year, the department itself, and by the way, that's targeted money, so they're moving towards spending that money, and we've just, Ms. Tate has given me a high level, define the money generated to increase student enrollment, and there was one-time monies that are expected in year to year. So what she's done is taken $143,000 and suggested that that's money that can be rolled over year to year because it's based on enrollment. So they have put in their own initiatives within their own department on how to spend that money, and that can be spent in salaries and et cetera. So they're looking at some significant additions there. And then one-time monies is that it's an additional set of monies, but we don't want to be spending it in salaries because that affects our operating budget in the future. So it's one-time money, and we can spend it on specificness. And they have put forward the expenditures for that. The last part of what they wish to spend for this year is the unassigned and emergent funds and the equity scan. So the board is embarking on the reconciliation, etc. The equity scan is coming forward. We've got some shifts and changes we want to look at there. And so they wanted to reserve about $165,000 there, which would be their intent on spending that full surplus for this year in a reasonable way. So to wrap all that up for you and to finish this part of the conversation, the amended budget contingency recommendations would be that the teacher average salary reduction of $1.9 million is put in the savings, whichever account the Secretary, Treasurer, and Finance feels. The decrease in the benefits and municipality premiums could be at around $700,000. And other additional additions to the amended budget, which would be $1 million, which we're going to suggest that we do spend. And that completes the 6 pieces of where the surpluses are, the major surpluses, and where we're recommending that we have an opportunity to spend or not. And I'll stop there for questions because that was a lot of information.
Mr. Sphere?
Okay. Just so I can grasp it, I guess if all the funding stay, including the SEC, which may or may not be clawed back, because the 1.3, there is potential with the contingency left of having a $5.4 million surplus at the end of the year. Is that correct?
But that's the total. Yeah.
And
unexpected funds this year that are all, yeah.
And I mean, not to debate it at the business committee, but I have asked in the future about trying to bring short terms or some money back into facilities that was by this board was to substantiate the budget, to bring in a stable budget. And we've now gone there, and there is, as I would say, a fair amount of money still sitting behind. And there has been very little movement. I'll say not no movement, but very little movement to reinstate what was taken out to balance the budget. Not taken out because the work wasn't necessary, but to balance the budget. So I say at the same time, it seems a little bit, in our view from QP, that if you can put that side of money aside, when do you look at restoring and replenishing the buildings and painting them and bringing them back to life that they should be? So I just put that out there for the trustees. It's not an answer to it because I think the 5.4 million is the numbers that'll add up.
Superintendent Blaine?
Sure, and I do believe that's a part of the budget process when we go into it for 18-19. And the priorities will be generated by the Department of Facilities around facilities. What the next best places to spend our money would be. And I know that Mr. Severe and we have had many conversations about how can we work the budget to both accomplish what we need to accomplish and what CUPE is looking for. And we're hoping that we will meet a good place. And you know, we do appreciate the fact that that the budget is becoming sustainable. It's probably in a sustainable place, but there is a difference between operating and capital and those types of things. But I do appreciate when Mr. Severe says we have issues out there in our schools that we could be looking at on how to spend some one-time money. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the whole intent of generating this kind of capital, so we can start to do that, as demonstrated with the Frank Nave proposal and some other pieces around the district at this point in time.
Trustee Higginson?
I appreciate Rob's comment, and I do agree with you that there are, you know, lots of maintenance issues that we could work on, and getting an increase in our capital funding would be an excellent start to that. One of the things I question, though, when you said 5.4, is that when I look at this, and maybe I'm just misunderstanding it, and I appreciate clarity, is that we have number 2, 1.97 million. No, wait, that's the wrong one. Oh, it's, sorry, number 3 is 1.9 million, and that's money that is a reduction of average teacher salary. And the other one, number 1, is almost 1.3 million, and those are numbers that we are concerned might be clawed back. And that's at 3.2 million of the 5.4 that you're talking about.
And the formulas have not been totally confirmed
Yeah.
as to what the number is.
And I know that there is a lot of, it's just not clear right now. People aren't sure with the SEC what's going to happen with that unused funds. Did we hire after September 30th? Did we use all the money? All that kind of stuff, and the average teacher salary. So I appreciate the need to, at this point, be conservative with it, and that at the end of the year, if we identify that it is actually going to be kept, because there is a lot of murkiness around what's going to happen with that funding. We don't know if it's going to be clawed back, and it would be understandable if it did. That's a significant amount of money provincially, but that would give us the opportunity then to make those decisions about what's being suggested, which I think are all excellent suggestions.
So he can after I ask him one question. So yeah, there are some significant amounts of money here that people see and like, wow, let's spend it. But the classroom enhancement fund and the enrollment and teacher average salary, the stuff that we were talking about, maybe potentially clawed back, and also some of the benefits of municipal pension stuff that's sort of all put together. My question sort of revolves around, and I know there's no answer, but on a basis of probabilities, when is it likely, will we know this sort of by the end of the school year, or is this something we're not going to know about until the beginning of next school year or possibly beyond? Like,
no, I think just off top of to answer that question, some of it will be done before the end of this school year and we'll be finalizing. Some of it will not be done until September, October probably, when we can finalize our budget and you know, when we actually declare surplus or not and how much is there. So, but I don't think this will stretch out for 2 years. I think within the next 12 months, and I'm looking over at Secretary Treasurer and Finance, we'll probably be very close to being fairly clear with what we want within an 8 to 12 month period.
okay, great, thanks. Trustee Berzovich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair to the superintendent. And forgive me if I stumble with how to word this question, because I'm processing it in my head. In looking at the issues around the reduced teacher average salary, certainly the implication of that is if they're lower salary, of course, they're less experienced, which would suggest, as I've met some of these new teachers, they are new teachers who are, this is for some of them their first job. Mm-hmm. Is there an understanding from the ministry that newer teachers like that may need supports around mentoring and so on and so forth? And can some of this money can we not make an argument that we need, even if we don't need this money for salaries, we need it anyway for supports for those teachers around mentoring and so on and so forth? Does that make sense?
No, absolutely, and I think you're right, is that we need to support our teachers. There's some money already in SEC overhead that is available, not enough, of course, and that would be certainly something that Learning Services Department would bring forward as a need for the 18-19 budget. And whether or not we got it from that fund or we just recognize it as a need of doing business and we add to it. But that would be the process, and then we could make that analysis at that time.
Sure.
I'm just going to make some final comments with regards to the projected overage in the classroom enhancement funds. When the amended budget is brought to you next month, you simply aren't going to see that additional almost $3 million in the classroom enhancement fund, because we've been advised by the ministry at this point that it has to be removed. So that budget will simply be reduced. It's not that it's going to be sitting off on the side somewhere to possibly be spent. And then in our reporting requirements, whether or not any other money is clawed back will be yet to be seen. We'll have to report to the ministry on how that special purpose fund is expended, and it has to be fully expended. So I just kind of wanted to put that issue off to the side. So then the projected surplus for this year isn't nearly as large as Rob has indicated. And in the amended budget for next year, staff is going to move forward with these district initiatives in terms of spending, unless there are any other questions or concerns about the priorities that the process staff have gone through. So I just wanted to reiterate that it's actually much smaller in terms of what's going to be put before you in February.
Great, thanks.
So there's a plan to spend about $1 million, and the CEF is a completely separate matter. That $1.3 million will not be in the amended budget.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Trustee Raleigh?
So you guys have mentioned the time to spend $1 million. My apologies because I arrived a little late. Was that you guys talked to the board about? No.
It's coming.
It's coming.
Oh, okay. So that's coming.
Okay, so moving on to the next piece. With that $1 million, as you're aware of the process now of where these budget strategies came from, and approved in brackets on the top of this page, on page 9, approved from the department, the ACE committee, Administrative Council, as to the recommendations. And so in the budget that you will see in February, these will be included. And certainly we wanted to describe them, discuss them, and this is coming from our priorities. So under Learning Services, the training of kindergarten teachers, nonviolent intervention training was brought to our attention. We probably need to do some of that. Some of these would just be operational funds that we're just shifting, and we're not shifting but adding anyway, because they are just required that we need to do. Some of them are more of an initiative phase, and I'll talk to those in a moment. The teacher mentorship program was brought to us out of Learning Services, and that was $11,000. You heard earlier in closed about a Safe Walk program that we're going in with the city with around looking at Safe Walk, etc. Our portion of that is $22,000, so that's a new initiative to support our active transportation. This puts an additional amount of money put to a budget that we already have in school consolidation of Rutherford. It was identified we need a little bit more money there. In request from when we talked to DPAC and our coordinators and et cetera, a slight increase to sexual health and social justice coordinator, 0.2 and 0.2. Special needs accessibility fund of $150,000. In the past, there was a separate amount of money coming in targeted for major initiatives for special needs as far as accessibility or lifts and those types of things. Our account, as I understand it, is basically at zero. Over the years, we spent it all, so we need to refurbish that a little bit. That $150,000 will be work done around the district as far as ramps and lifts and et cetera, and hopefully some of that money can also be spent on our own people doing that work. Secondary schools, the marquee signs have been brought forward to us over the last 2 or 3 years, and we're feeling that we can now move forward with some of it. This is a cost share, so this would be the initial three of our high schools would move to these types of signs, and they would be paying a cost share piece to that. As far as the safety committee and the communications department, we are now creating a school messenger system. It's an additional messenger system similar to Voice, the old Voice, but it calls out and emails all parents. And the difference of this and what some of the schools already have is that we will have access from the board office, and we would be instantaneously be able to send out a message to every parent household in the district that is on it. So it accesses the different school website, web-based products, and sends it out to all the addresses in those systems. We are continuing, we put some money aside last year for the asbestos inventory, but we suggest we continue with that. WorkSafe, our safety committee, the ministry came in and said we need to increase our WorkSafe committee training, and that's that piece. Our vehicle replacement fleet we had put on hold for a while. Now, both the WorkSafe above and the next line, the vehicle equipment, you'll see that we have funds going out for 3 years. So when we put this in, we're also committing to the next 3 years. So you'll see that reflected in the budget when you bring it forward to you. And the vehicle and equipment fleet replacement is about replacing our aging fleet there. School equipment replacement, we've gone with it. We in the past have cut much of our equipment repair and equipment repair accounts. And we're suggesting that we can take some one-time money and put it into there so that we can reinstate some of that work. Just the increase from SCC and et cetera, cleaning products and paper products for schools, we needed to add in there. We're also suggesting that we move over a 1.0 FTE to a QP position in facilities to be spent by the department there. That would come out in custodial, carpentry, however, and they have a plan around that for increasing that. We're also suggesting that we move the lead in the water project to phase 3 and complete it by September of this year instead of postponing it into the next year. So that would be one-time money, and the request also is tied to looking at how much of that work can be done by our people as well. So that's $100,000, and we would complete therefore that project in a year ahead of time. School-based equipment, replacement of blinds and et cetera. The scrubbers, if you note, those are the electric scrubbers out there to allow more efficiencies for our custodians, et cetera, for cleaning. That $60,000 would include bringing 3 of them in. And the district composting and recycling program is something that the board was interested in. It was prioritized last year, and we thought that we could handle that this year as well. So all of a sudden, that's $1.1 million. And so those items would be put right into the budget and the line items that you will see in February.
Any questions? I've got a question, I guess. So the $1 million actually comes from the operating budget adjustment, right? So there were 10 surplus divisions, but that $1 million is a recurring $1 million. It's a year-over-year $1 million because of where it's coming from?
It could be, yes. It may also be a result of the implementation of the SCC and how that played out in other classes. We're not exactly sure. Okay. I think the board can see that when we do our projections for this year, that we'll be looking at those types of things so that we can spend. Our goal is to spend all the money in operating to operating. Right? So that continues. Okay.
And I guess from my perspective, I don't know how others feel about this, but I certainly appreciate the list of, because these are all positive things for the district. And there are, I think, 3 items on here that have multi-year costs. 2 of them look like they're for 3 years, but the addition of 1 FTE for QP could be a recurring cost for over many years, right?
Yes.
So, when we present budget items, I think it's really important to make a distinguish between one-off items and versus recurring expenses. And if we can do that in the future, I think it would help get our minds around, like, we're committing to
Yes.
this for many years as opposed to, you know, we're fixing this problem with.
So in the analysis, when we talk about these things, we did take those into consideration, that we feel that they're A, very, very important, and they're must-dos, cost of doing business, and B, that the budget will be able to maintain those types of things in the future. So we can say now early that those items are possible.
Okay, great, thanks. Trustee Burzich?
May I ask gently, the second item down there, I guess that speaks to, yeah, like, for example, I see you carried over some of these, like the QP one, but you didn't carry over the cost for the .2 of the sexual health coordinator. Is that just going to show up differently in the budget after that?
So the thought behind that is that as the Department of Learning Services looks at their goals, they'll look at each individual piece of game, and so it will come out in the budget process this year when they present. So hopefully there will be some goals around that and the rationale of why they feel that it either needs to increase or decrease.
Okay. And
So it was intended on one-time money as compared to the QP. We looked at the intention that we were able to carry it forward because of the input from the board and from QP to the table.
And the same thing with, say, the teacher mentoring. I see there's nothing there for it in 2018, 2019.
That's right. We're unsure of whether or not there's going to be funds or monies and those types of things. So all that will come out in the budget process.
Okay.
So, great, thank you for this information. Trustee Bob?
Just a quick question, just wondering with regards to school-based equipment, is that much more than normal or is it about average?
I don't know, I'm looking at around what it was before we started to cut it years ago. I would think that it's not up to what we used to put in. It probably should be maybe double that in the future, and if we can afford it, those types of things need to be reinstated. But we were not able to put those types of funds in the initial budget process.
Sure. Secretary Turner?
I was just going to add that in the years that we had to make some significant cuts, these are the types of programs that also went by the wayside and are creating structural deficits in the areas of replacement programs. And so we need to get back to embedding these in the budget and just in the annual budget, replacement of vehicles, replacement of equipment, so that ongoing it's sustainable and that we're not trying to look at it 5 years from now and having a huge hit to the budget. So it's just to address those ongoing issues that just, it's just the work that we should be doing.
Well, thank you for all of this work and your presentation. Are there any more questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda.
If the board would have a look at page 10. So I wanted to bring forward to the board for your perusal and acceptance of the agenda for the 2020 vision, learning progression. And as you're aware, that the budget is included in on these dates that have been put forward. The overall process is similar and based on last year's process, where we are doing surveys, we are communicating to the public, we will set up opportunities for input. The different departments between now and spring break will present what's been going on in their departments, any data that they have been acquiring to suggest that they're moving in the same direction or moving in a different direction, and some of their goals. Right before spring break, we will be ready to present all the budget initiatives and strategies that are coming from the departments, and also a full conversations with our different collective groups. And at that time, the board will see all of the budget strategies. The intent from us will be, when we come back after spring break, moving into the budget process, where we will present to you the budget and some identified funds that we feel that we can spend on the budget strategies for the future. And hopefully out of that, we will be able to spend some of that extra money into and put it into the budget strategies. So that's very similar to what the board is familiar with, and to allow for a wholesome conversation and information sharing. As you can see, we've instated tentative dates for all of it, which includes the enrollment projections and amended budget and the regular budget presentations, and I tried to align it as best I could to the dates of your regular meetings, and I think there's only one special meeting requested to allow things to move forward. And I also, on the request of the, I think it was the business committee agenda setting, tried to estimate some time parameters around the presentations for you there, so that we can judge other items that would come to the agendas at that time of the year. If we follow this suggestion, we have room at the end to meet more if we need to do that. But if it all worked as we're suggesting by April the 25th, before the 1st of May, we would be completing the budget in plenty of time for the Minister of Education piece. So all I'm bringing forward is just an acceptance of that, if the board is okay with it. It's a draft all the time as we move forward, because it often takes some shifts and moves as other things come up that we need to move on.
Trustee Berzer?
I'm in two minds. On the one hand, I certainly like that we are sort of sticking to mostly our regular Wednesdays. However, I found last year in particular, and in thinking of, we had a really good education meeting last week, and got excellent presentation about the proposed topics and things. I'm a little concerned about budget taking away time out of those education meetings to actually be having discussions about actual education and programs and where we're going, what we're doing. I would almost rather have one more extra special meeting on a Thursday, I pick Thursday off the top of my head, or Monday, or whatever, and keep an education meeting that is more for education. I don't know, I'm concerned.
It's up to the board.
Yeah, I know, I just thought I'd put it out there as for
Trustee Brennan?
Yeah, we had presented last week a rather ambitious agenda, or numbers of agendas for future education committee meetings, and I was excited by that. And when I see budget, which is the domain of the business committee, bumping education committee meetings, I'm concerned that, you know, we're going to drift away from focusing on education, and we can always have other meetings. I mean, in the past there have been many special business committee meetings beyond the typical Wednesday meetings. So I would prefer to maintain the schedule of education committee meetings, and if needs be, then schedule a special business committee meeting to take care of business that we can't within the regular confines.
Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. I'm just looking at this. If it's the board's will, really we're talking about March the 7th and April the 4th. I would suggest that the presentation by the Department of Learning Services is education, and so maybe it could stay at yeah, it could stay at the education piece. So maybe March the 7th is okay, and we can move a couple of the other pieces away from there, the finance department, etc. And we could move April the 4th into a special meeting, and there would be an additional night that we would pick in April to begin the budget process and not hit the... I would suggest that we try to keep it in the April the 4th week.
Sure.
So that's the first one, and it gives us a month of it. And if the board wishes to do that, we can put that work together and get it back to you as an amendment to the draft.
Thank you.
Trustee Higginson?
I'm wondering if there's not just a hybrid that could be suggested here. I mean, March is kind of a is a bit bananas anyway because of March break, so I think that's not actually related to, we have to condense those meetings anyway because of March break. And if we can't, I mean, I guess it's put a bookmark in for April, the April meeting, but there's lots of time here. I mean, we're talking about submitting in May when there's, you know, still a whole month. If it means maybe having us stay a little bit longer, we're usually out of here in an hour and a half on a committee night. Maybe if there's something that needs to be covered, then we stay for 2 hours. I just, rather than clogging up, taking an extra night in a time that's already busy for, because it's not just us who's meeting. I mean, when you look along here, you see how much extra meetings our staff is having with our partner groups already. I mean, they're going to be meeting their faces off. I don't know if they're going to want to come and have another meeting. So maybe we just bookmark a meeting date that everybody can have just in case. And if we need it, we have it. And if we don't need it, we can cancel it and simply merge some things where we can. That's my suggestion.
They love to meet with us. They need to meet with us.
You can just let us look at it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, what I'm getting from the table is that with respect to April, we want to build in some flexibility. Yes.
Just move that we refer the meeting schedule to staff for possible changes.
Of those two natures. Yeah.
Sure. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Any, you want to speak to it or?
Well, I mean, the superintendent has agreed to consider changing some dates. You know, and I think that's good enough for me, so.
Okay. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
We'll bring it back at the morning.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Next we'll hear from Secretary Treasurer McVeigh regarding an appointment of an audit firm, and there's an information sheet on page 13 through 15.
All right, so on page 13 of your package is an action sheet with a recommendation from staff that the business committee recommend that the Board of Education appoint KPMG as the auditors for the school district for a term of 3 years with an option of a 2-year, 2 one-year renewals. And the first audit year will be ending June 30th, 2018. As you're aware, in accordance with Section 158 of the School Act, the school board has to appoint an audit firm. MMP, as you're aware, we've worked with for many years, and we've had a great relationship with them. But we did put it to an RFP, and as you can see in the action sheet, not only was KPMG the low bid, but they have a great depth of experience with school districts. So it's our recommendation that we appoint KPMG.
Okay, we have a mover and a seconder. Did you want to speak to it?
Too briefly. I think certainly KPMG shows that they've got a good deal of experience that will make some suitable choice. And I just know from my personal experience working in nonprofits and having maintenance audits, there's value in changing your auditor periodically. Yeah, it's just different set of eyes, different things. Yeah. So I think it's time.
Any other questions or comments? Anybody opposed to the idea? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next is item 8.4, and we're going to hear about the annual transportation review, some recommendations, and an action sheet.
Good evening. David Prevost and myself, David Prevost, Transportation Supervisor, and myself will be presenting the what we call the Transportation 17-18 Annual Route Review. And the route review, the route review is based on the recently updated AP 512, Admin Procedure 512, which is based on the new transportation policy. And there's a number of elements in the new administrative policy that affect the way transportation reviews routes and presents the information to the board with respect to staff's intention on moving forward with operating adjustments to the school bus routing. And I think that we'll talk more about that as we go through the details. And, we'll have an opportunity to answer questions as well, perhaps as we go, to make sure we're clarifying. So the first couple of slides indicate the portions of AP 512 that we're focused in on tonight that drive us to bring a presentation with respect to the route review. And the first one is, it indicates that in the event that eligible ridership falls below 50% capacity of the bus, the route will be automatically considered for review. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. The second one that is indicated is that staff should conduct safety and hazardous walking condition assessments of the routes. And so we have undertaken that in the fall and have those results here today. The next item is, once the route review process, the review of the individual routes is complete, the district developed a matrix for establishing and maintaining bus routes. And that's the matrix which is designed as a tool to aid in the decision to create, maintain, alter, or eliminate a bus route. And so I'll be speaking tonight, Dave and I will be speaking tonight in detail about how staff have developed and utilized this information. So first off, we did a review of ridership capacity. And so that ridership is listed in the presentation, in our documentations, by route and by percentage. So it's easy to reference. We use the data out of our ZPass system from November, and it's representative of the data of the average rider throughout the school year, the 17-18 school year. We based it, the average registered eligible rider is compared to capacity. So there are more riders on the system than just eligible. There are ineligible or courtesy riders. And the average registered eligible rider is slightly lower than the registered eligible riders. But it does represent the daily usage of the bus. The percentage then represents how full the bus is on a particular trip. Those under 50% were to be automatically reviewed. In the end, we reviewed every single route as it was year one, and I'll speak to that a little bit more. So you can see here we have every regular route indicated. Special needs routes were not included in the review, as they're specifically designed each year. And on the right-hand side, we've listed the percentage of bus capacity utilized on the average eligible rider. And we've resorted it in the next slide to indicate lowest to highest percentages. And so you can see on some routes there's 0% utilization, as there's no eligible riders on those routes. They're only courtesy routes. Okay. So we used this data and we looked at every route below 50%, which is a substantial amount of routes. The review of ridership below capacity. So when we're looking at those routes that come in below 50%, we're saying, what are we going to do with that? How are we going to review them? Well, we completed a route review and hazard evaluation form and considered the entire trip overview. And I'll speak a little bit later about the route review and hazard form itself and how that drives the system. And so we created a trip overview, which I'll go over. And then in addition to trip overview, staff considered the eligible and ineligible riders, regular courtesy, transportation assistance versus the cost of running the trip and the route, service levels and options available. We also did an annual, just a bit, get a bit oriented here. So we also did the annual route review, which in this case, because it's the first year, we did all the routes. So not only the routes under 50%, but we did all the routes. And the bus route and hazard evaluation form was completed for every route by riding or driving the individual routes. And Dave Prevost took on this task in the fall. And as I said, he either rode or drove the individual routes. And Dave, could you take a minute and just speak to the process of of riding a route and completing the form, and then I'll carry on with the trip.
Yeah, you bet. So riding the route, you know, as I mentioned before, it's a fun job, and you get to meet a lot of kids. So it's really distracting to actually ride the bus and try to complete the form. It's a lot of fun, but it's very distracting and difficult to do. So even the routes I rode the route on, I pretty much went out and drove them again in the truck just to be sure. So the things I'm looking for are, you know, is everything in the hazard evaluation form, such as walking conditions, street lights, road crossings for the students, any hazards, dangers, or the exact opposite as well. So, and from there, I completed the hazard evaluation form. Is that pretty much?
Yes, thank you. And so you can imagine riding a bus route that's a half an hour or so. There's a lot of data, a lot of information to be documented. So in the first year, we expect that the second year, third year, we'll be upgrading that data, focusing on different parts of the run, making the document more complete, etc. We're also expect to do some format changes to the document. Found a few ways we could sort of improve the information, and then in year 2, we expect only to assess selected runs. There would be no reason to assess some of the runs that we feel are core to the bus and don't need a reason to be reviewed. But we would focus in on those runs where we know data's changing or routes are dropping below 50%. We will look at all the runs to update the student numbers and any changing information on runs that come to light. Now, this is the outcome of the trip hazard review, and there's a detailed form behind this, but this forms essentially the high-level advice arising out of it. It's a little bit difficult to read. I'll touch base on some of it. I'll ask Dave to speak, and this is part of the process where we're trying to take all of the data on the run and all of the and synthesize it into something that's high level enough we can understand. So for instance, by walkway, that means that there is a walkway that's deemed to be reasonably safe for students to walk on. On this particular route, Trip 1, Route 1, there are sidewalks. So the majority of the walk for the majority of the students does have sidewalks to that school. For instance, lighting in that area of town, which is the Hammond Bay Road to Dover Bay School, there's also lighting in that area.
Did you want them throughout, or do you want me to wait?
Oh, please.
Okay, sorry, ma'am, questions. So you just said sidewalks on a majority of the route. When you say majority of the route, that could mean many things.
Yeah.
Is there an ability for you to note that the majority of the route, that, you know, those places where there aren't may or may not be very safe places? I mean, I think about walking to Mountain View, which I know this isn't, but there could be sidewalks all the way till 500 meters before, but it's that actual S-turn right in front of
Yes.
Mountain View that's the problem. So is there a way to note that when you say a majority of the route, whether there's the places where there aren't sidewalks is actually safe or concerning? Or?
I'll let Dave answer that in the first, and then I'll add on to it.
Okay.
Sure, yeah, so of course there would be, it may not show up on this type of thing or onto the matrix or such, but it would show up in the hazard evaluation form.
Thank you.
And right now it just shows a percentage, an approximate percentage of sidewalks in the area.
Okay, thank you.
So the intent of the document, just to finish that question, the intent of the document then is to be able for us to then identify which sections, which hazards there are, and then work with the local agencies to provide them with some information that they may use to adjust their planning.
Okay.
And so to use that example, bringing that to the RDN and making them aware that we have done a route review, that we've identified some hazards.
Okay, thank you.
Well, there's in the narrative, Mr. Prevost has notes about if there's sidewalks, that's fine. Where there aren't sidewalks, sometimes the route is narrow and busy with traffic, so there is a sort of a recognition that where there isn't a sidewalk, it can occasionally be dangerous.
Yes, thank you. To carry on with a few examples, for instance, there is public transportation available along that corridor, and a number of the students who are in fact perhaps would-be courtesy, are riding the RDN route, and they're riding the RDN route because it provides a slightly better service in respect to pickup times and drop-off times than the actual school bus does. And that's because the bus has to complete other runs in the district, other trips. That particular route has to do other trips and meet other bell schedules. For instance, there's a note in the concern where there was no apparent active transportation plan in place at Dover Bay, but should they put one in place, then that could move towards a positive checkmark. So the hazardous forms, they document the route conditions, they allow for comments, and it provides a simplified trip overview as we've indicated. Now, you know, when you have that many routes, the information has to be reasonably simple to understand it. Each trip overview is then summarized in a district route trip matrix. And then in that matrix, staff have commented, comments are provided besides each of those, whether the trip was reviewed under 50%, the reason if it was reviewed because it was under 50%, and then there's considerations that staff have made as they've done their review. They've made considerations and they've listed what those are. And so we'll talk about those specifically. So here's a copy of the matrix, and you can see every route's listed and every trip overview is listed, and the checks and X's depending on the category. And again, this is diagrammatic, and the checks and X's reference back to the route review form. On the right-hand side, you've got comments, so where it says review, that means that route was reviewed under the less than 50%. As I said, we did review all the routes. And then there's items in there where staff have made a comment and reviewed that, so route 1, trip 1 says review and consider elimination. So in fact, based on the trip overview, and I'll go back to that document, based on the walkway conditions, the type of road crossing, the lighting, public transportation available, all of the factors, staff are indicating that they believe that we can adjust the system by eliminating that route. And this is one of 3 tweaks that to the system that we're going to go over in our total route summary. So that's why we picked the route 1 to go over. And so you can see there's other routes that we just reviewed. There are other routes that we reviewed that they're blank because they were above 50%. And then there's other items that are listed for consideration that we'll speak to. So AP 512 says the matrix is a tool that will aid in the decision to create, maintain, and alter or eliminate a bus route. And that's exactly how staff has used this. So staff reviewed the matrix and considered each trip overview in that matrix. Given the ability to, the matrix gives the ability for the transportation supervisor to continue to review the relative issues on each of the route in one snapshot. We considered the detailed route information that was available, and we created a list of bus route recommendations. And the items that we've created, and I'll go over those in a minute, are items to be reviewed in the 17-18 budget year for implementation in the 18-19 school year, so for September. So these are the route review recommendations, and I'm going to pass to Dave Prevost to give a high level, and then we can answer questions.
Sure. So thank you, Peter. So Route 1, Trip 1, that's a route that has a very small amount of registered eligible students. As we indicated in the trip overview sheet, that it does have reasonably safe walking conditions. I think as safe as we're going to get in our district, just about. It's got availability of RDN and transit busing. They're all secondary students. It's got good street lighting. And again, the number is very low and has been very low for many years. The trips, Route 5 and 6, Trip 1 and 2, we're looking at consolidating. Sorry, are we doing questions?
Perhaps we should pause.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Yeah, Trustee Routley apparently has a question.
And Rob.
Yeah, I just had a question. Like I understand 12 riders eligible, but how many people ride? It would just be nice to know.
There's
in the
one
binder.
courtesy rider on that
13
route.
people ride.
And the information's in the binder, but there's an average, I believe, of 7 or 8 per day riding that bus. If off the top of my head, I believe that's the number. And
8
so
average.
yeah, so there's 8 out on average, and that's the high average. I take the morning and afternoon.
And the special needs riders aren't included?
If they're riding our regular buses, they're included, yes.
Also,
Our special needs routes are not included in the review.
oh, okay, so that if they have a learning disability or special needs, they wouldn't be included there?
Correct. If they're riding a regular route bus, then yes, they would be included, I guess.
Rob Shear's got a question.
Yeah, it goes to the bottom line and it says would be eligible for transportation assistance, and in view of it, and I've already had a little bit of a discussion around, and we haven't had a full one because we weren't party to what's going on there, so I'd like the full binder and the details of how it came about, because it's a change in the mandate of the way we're doing our work. But in our collective agreement, kids that ride the buses ride by our bus drivers. And if you're paying travel assistance that's outside the normal use for which it was done, violates that term. So I'm just putting it on caution. You can make decisions, but I'm very well aware that in the past when the runs were eliminated, there wasn't people being provided travel assistance to ride on another fare to eliminate jobs out of QP for in this district. That is basically contracting out. If you had a small school, would you say you'd bring in different teachers or different people to save money on it, or cost assist them to go to another school? I don't think that would be something you'd be doing. So just put it out as a caution.
Superintendent Blaine?
As the board's aware that we'll be having discussions with CP, but at this point in time, there are no cuts to the transportation budget and or personnel.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure, should I comment further? Just keep
It says eliminate. It's a recommendation that's going to be done, so.
So again, so we'll carry on to routes 5 and 6 unless there's further questions about Route 1. Okay, thank you, Route 5 and 6, generally, anytime, as a transportation manager, I'm always reviewing numbers and looking at numbers. Can we make our buses more efficient? Can we fill them? Because ultimately, I'd love to see all our buses at 75% and higher. So we're looking at these routes, and I've been watching them for several years, watching the numbers drop down, and this is the first year where the numbers are to the point where we can consolidate the 2 bus routes. They both provide service in the upper and lower Lanceville area. So it's sort of to me, it's a given, it's something that we should be doing because, like I said, it just makes us more efficient. We're transporting the same amount of students. They would have a slightly longer bus ride for half of them. And Dover Bay students would be affected by being dropped off 10 minutes early in the morning, picked up 10 minutes later in the afternoon. So that's really the largest adverse effect. So that's something that we're recommending for the 18-19 school year. And so then we're also looking at some service improvements in the south end of our district. We've got 2 bus routes, 11 and 15. Provide service on Yellow Point and in Cassidy, and they drop off at Livingston Secondary right now at 7:20 in the morning. So we're looking at making some alterations to those routes. All students again would be provided transportation as they are now, just with better times on routes 11 and 15. But to do so, we're going to affect routes 8, 11, 12, 15, and 17. So they would all be affected in some small ways, with the exception of 11, 15, which is some fairly large changes. So again, we're just doing that to making some proposed changes to improve service to students.
So this would be a good time to comment.
So I just wanted to reiterate the idea behind these 4 pieces is that the shifts and changes is 1, 2, and 3 lead us into supporting improvements in item number 4. And it's all within the transportation budget. It's shifting just the assignments and being flexible for the needs of the day.
If I might add to that, this is a good time to mention that the route review process is, in a sense, outside of the budget process, and it's designed to focus in on the route safety and the trip overview and the tweaks to the system. And any items arising out of the process would be that our budget impact would be envisioned to be recommended into the budget process, and where these would be considered to be tweaking the system for service adjustments. And as I said, any significant budget items would be referred to that process. Next steps, while we're presenting at the business committee, and information would be released through the communications department, the link to this presentation and the slideshow, so that the public could be informed as to the results of the route review. Transportation will also send the information to the affected stakeholders of each route/trip, parents and schools. Transportation would then adjust the routes as indicated in the presentation. Once the routes were adjusted, transportation would work to publish those routes at their typical time as per past practice in mid-June. We do it in mid-June. We don't want to cause confusion. If you publish mid-year, people don't always catch that it's for the next year. And we would update the routes and trips on the website as is our usual procedure. And then we would again specifically notify those stakeholders of the changes so that they knew in September what their new bus run looked like and the stop times, etc., and that they could adjust their personal schedules accordingly. And then, of course, the new routes would start in September. Just as an adjunct to the program, I did want to indicate that we are working with the City of Nanaimo on a Safe Walk program for 17-18, and so the city has hired a vendor and a consultant, and we are a partner in that, cost share partner in that. And the four schools involved are the 3 that are receiving schools from the closure of Rutherford and Departure Bay, as it has received some concerns with respect to traffic safety in that area. We're also working for 18-19. Currently, both agencies are working to see how we can expand the program and continue in a sustainable fashion to work together under our collaboration agreement to see if we can have a few schools addressed every year and have an ongoing Safe Walk program. The Safe Walk program includes the basics of the active transportation, so we're looking at student walk patterns. We're looking also at biking and different amenities for such to give students to identify and educate the students on the ways to get to school and the safer routes to get to school.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation and all the hard work that went into doing this for the very first time, because I'm sure driving all of the routes was a time-consuming endeavor, doing it twice, once in a bus and then on your own. Thank you very much. So taking questions, Trustee Higginson?
So I just want to try and consolidate this information that you just gave us into a easily understandable soundbite for my head. So we're talking about eliminating Route 1, Trip 1. And it is a total of 5 to 8 riders average, but there's 12 riders that are eligible. And there's transportation assistance available, and there is already an RDN bus that goes along that route. Most of the students who are in that area currently already ride. They're all secondary students? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I can confirm most, but I do know that there are riders on that bus.
Okay. Then the second suggestion is combining Trip 1 and 2 of routes 5 and 6, which would result in no riders riding longer than 30 minutes, and only a change really in kids being dropped off 10 minutes earlier and 10 minutes picked up 10 minutes later at Dover. That's, yes. And then the third one is improvements to the routes 11 and 15, and then there's some other things down here that are mentioned because of a very early drop-off time and complaints and concerns about safety. So improving a service. So we're talking about the third recommendation is to improve service.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Those sound like great recommendations. Thank you.
Secretary Treasurer?
I just wanted to address QP President Rob Spear's concern with regards to the recommendations, and just to point out that we've had the discussions with QP, that it's a labor relations issue, and we'll continue to have that discussion, but staff would not make any recommendations or accept any recommendations that it believed created any violation of the collective agreement. So what we've put before you is, in our view, not a violation.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Riley?
I don't have a binder yet, but within the binder, within the recommendation, is there, of course, as trustees, it'd be good for us to have the wording of the collective agreement, just so that, because that is, part of a trustee's job is that policy and oversight. just so we're kind of all aware ourselves of the you know, the labor relations implications, and that's just like a request. That would be nice to see it. But I'm sure I can do a little digging and see the words, because that's something I'd like to see. And the other thing is, you guys had mentioned service improvement. I'm just wondering if there's been concerns over the last few years of services that aren't being delivered in transportation to various schools, or you know, parents that would like a bus going a different direction when there's only one going one way. And I'm just wondering if you guys have compiled those and looked at service delivery changes so that the bus drivers wouldn't be out of work but would be adding service. You know what I mean? Like improving service delivery. Is that looked at?
Through the chair. That's essentially the intent of the program, is to, the review, I believe, is to continually monitor the services provided, take input from stakeholder groups, and then provide recommendations for changes within the transportation budget, for service adjustments within the transportation budget. And so as year one of the program, it's obviously not going to be comprehensive and pick up every single concern, nor can it include every single item in concern. However, we are continuing to evaluate the runs and the concerns of individuals, and we'll bring forward those. The intent is to bring forward those significant recommendations each year to address them. And the idea behind that is that we'll have a dynamic transportation program that can shift and change with the needs of the district, and not be static, but can slowly adjust to the needs of the system over time.
Trustee Brennan?
Thanks, Chair. I move that the Business Committee recommend that the board receive the bus route review report at this next meeting.
Seconded by Trustee Solomon.
And just briefly, this didn't just happen overnight. This has been the result of several years of budget planning and grief-stricken meetings where people have complained about potential withdrawal of bus service or the addition of bus service. And the criteria by which bus routes have been determined, which is by the distance. And as most people know, the map is not the territory. The map is flat. Whereas around here, the territory isn't that flat. And it's busy or it's not busy, it's lit or it's not lit, it's sidewalks or not sidewalks. And I think what staff have done is taken a good look at the territory and considered the potential danger and hopefully safety of these various routes, and have come up with a good report with some solid recommendations. So I'm really pleased that they have done this. It's been a long labor of love, I'm sure, Mr. Sabo and Mr. Prevost, but it's done for this year. And I think the commitment to ongoing reviews makes sure that as things change, and hopefully as the district grows in size and numbers, that the transportation department can respond to it. So.
Great. Trustee Higginson?
And I'll support the recommendation as well. I just, we've had this binder wasn't made available to trustees last week, and it is a good thing that it was, because there's an incredible amount of work in here and information, and I appreciate the amount of information that's gone into this, and it makes the process much easier to understand, and it's much more nuanced now, and I appreciate that we now have the ability to not just say, well, this is a cutoff line, you're 4.8 kilometers, but actually look at safety situations and issues, and whether there's accessible other forms of transportation, and all of those types of things. So I really appreciate the work that went into it, and actually did find it quite an interesting read, despite the fact that it's called Bus Route Review Binder. So thank you for all the work. Thank you for all the work that went into it, and I too support the recommendation.
Anybody else have anything to add with respect to the recommendation? All those in favor? Any opposed? Trustee Routley is opposed. Motion carries. We have no correspondence.
Oh, no, wait, there's another one in here.
Oh, right.
If I could continue then, a little housekeeping around the transportation piece. As the board is aware, we instituted a bus route to North Oyster from Davis Road, Ladysmith, when we looked at when Davis Road was closed. And that was a grandfather clause in it that it would follow through from the K to 7 grouping, and it would discontinue in June 2021. Since that time, the ministry has brought forward the transportation fund, and we've had an increase in enrollment and et cetera, so the stability of that run and the district being able to support that run, I think is there now. And so we're suggesting in some way that we rescind the motion that it would discontinue in June 2021, and it would be a regular route under AP 512, and the need of us to transport those students on an ongoing basis while French immersion is at North Oyster from Ladysmith. So we're suggesting that this motion is rescinded out, and the route itself is just adopted into the policy.
What is the route? What number?
11 and 12.
11 and 12.
Yeah.
Trustee
I'll make the motion based on the recommendation that the board or the committee recommended the board that they rescind any commitment beyond 2021 for those students. And if I get a second there. And I think it isn't complicated. What happens is 2021, this route goes into the mix in terms of consideration for maintaining that route. It loses that special status of the grandfather, but it can be assessed on its own merits at that time. So there's no commitment to quitting that route. It simply becomes one of those routes that is reviewed by our staff, and they bring forward a recommendation.
Thank you. That was moved by Trustee Brennan and seconded by Trustee Robinson. Trustee Higginson?
I just want to make sure that, I want to make sure that we don't just rescind everything and don't leave it hanging. So I think that the way you've worded it is just to rescind the part that says 2021. Okay, because as it's worded here, it seems a little bit like it might appear to people as a concerning motion, but this is actually supposed to be a reassuring motion to people that we are not going to be stopping it in 2021, full stop, that we are going to continue it on and allow it to be part of the bus route review, annual review, and make its way into the binder. So, okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Trustee Solomon?
Just a comment. I certainly think it's very, very applicable, and I'm very glad that we're doing this. And I think part of this was prompted by the fact that we send a letter to the parents every year reminding them that it's a couple of years away, but we're going to be rescinding this week. And I think it just gives us some security. So that's good.
So I have a clarifying question then. So instead of a letter going out this year to them, would the letter then go out indicating what the board has passed? Thank you. Trustee Berzich?
Thank you, yes. Just a small question, and I mean, I support the motion. I do wonder, because I guess I'm a bit confused. North Oyster is French immersion, is it dual track?
Dual.
Okay. So the students who are getting the bus, would they be going to North Oyster anyway, or are they only going there because of French immersion? Are we opening a can of worms in the sense that other students who could go to their catchment school are going to French immersion and don't get busing? Do you see my potential concern?
Through the chair, I think I can interpret that a couple ways. The first one, if you're a French immersion student going to North Oyster and you have a sibling coming up, that sibling has the ability to go to North Oyster.
Okay.
Okay, so if you're a Ladysmith student and you're one of your sons or daughters are French immersion and the other is then they could go both to North Oyster, or the English stream could go to LIS or LPS. Okay. The direct catchment for the English stream is in the North Oyster area, and so we're also drawing from there. As you're aware, the North Oyster attachment in the English stream is approximately 100 students, and French immersion is approximately 200.
Trustee Higginson?
I understand your concern about the can of worms, and are we opening up a can of worms where all French immersion students can now ask for a bus?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
I think it's important to note the anomaly of North Oyster in terms of its French immersion, that most of the kids who go to French immersion in North Oyster live in one part of town that is outside of, even though we don't provide busing, but they live there. And then they get brought to here. And in our other French immersion schools, many of them live within the walking catchment of the school, and if they don't, they come from everywhere to get there, not just one place. This bus stops in 2 places in Ladysmith. It just stops in 2 places. So it's kind of an anomaly when it comes to French immersion. And then there's, you know, this is one of those things that shows all the cogs in the wheel, I suppose, where if this bus is discontinued, and this is something that we'll have to think about in the future, if this bus is discontinued and that means that many students stop going to this French immersion school, the viability of the program is put into question, as well as what do we do with all of these bodies now that return to Ladysmith? We don't actually, I mean, at this point, I think the facilities in Ladysmith at the elementary level are quite full. And if all of these students stopped going to North Oyster, or if this continuation, the next wave of them did, we'd have another issue on our hands. So the continuing of the bus there's always, you know, things to think about outside of policy that we need to, and that's partly what this procedure does.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And I can move on to what I was going to do before. So we received no correspondence from the regular board meeting. We have no unfinished business, but under new business we have 2 items, both of which somehow I'm responsible for. So as your BCPC public administrator, your BCPC rep, the AGM for this organization is coming up next week. And as you know, because I reported out in December, this organization has been under a public administrator for the last number of years and is now transitioning back to a trustee-led board of directors. And so I guess I'm looking, because I'll be voting as part of the board for this motion or against this motion, depending on the will of the board. I'm seeking input from trustees here how you would like me to vote at the AGM next week. So the special resolution, I sent you all an email about it. It's relatively lengthy. It goes over the details. It changes the bylaws to reinstate a trustee-led board of directors. There are 7 elected directors, one from each of the regional zones. They're elected for a 3-year staggered term. The trustee that's elected this year for the Vancouver Island area or zone will be serving a 3-year term. Some of the others are serving a 1, some are serving a 2, so if they get elected this year, they'll only serve 1 or 2 years, but whoever gets elected from Vancouver Island will be serving 3. That's basically the nuts and bolts of how it's going to work. It's a weighted vote, so the number of students you have in your school district determines how much weight your vote carries. So I guess I'll ask, are there any objections to my voting for this special resolution? Seeing none?
No, trustee.
Just a couple questions. What is their reasoning for staggering and for basically based on population? And how do you feel about that?
Well, the reason it's staggered is so there's not a complete turnover of a directorship at any one given time. So, you know, I don't know how they work out the numbers. There's 7, so probably 2 and then 2 and then 3. So 5 or 4 will remain while the new members are elected and brought on board. So there's not a huge turnover. So that's the reason for that. The weighted vote is just simply a recognition of, you know, if you got a school district with 2 kids and their vote counts as much as somebody that has, you know, 1 million kids, that's not necessarily the right way. The school district with 2 kids carries a much greater vote than they should really have. So having a population-weighted vote, I think, is a good thing. Any other questions, or Trustee Solomon?
Well, I just want to thank you for being involved with this and taking our feedback and doing it as it is. I mean, I read it over and it all seemed to make a lot of sense, so I appreciate the fact that you'll be supporting it. Yeah,
Great. All right, thank you. Seeing none, that's how I will vote. Item 11.2 is regarding the viability of learning studios. So this actually came as a recommendation from the QP Trustee Liaison Committee, and I'll give Rob a moment if he would like to speak to it, as it was something that the QP executive brought forward to the group.
As I say, it comes under a basically initiative to, over the period of times, both parties have been unable to work with apprenticeships and do other things. Another school district with the ability of portables coming on site took the initiative to build their own through their workforce. And they were building portables that were, of course, a better standard. Built in-house, maintaining, built to the way people wanted them, rather than bringing them in and redesigning or making changes. And we looked at it, and their costs were probably just as much, or if not less, than the ones that would be coming in because of the cost of transporting them and the rest of the stuff that would go with it. And we thought if we could work out a balance in retrospect of keeping ours and bringing in the CTC students that work within the class, that it could be a win-win for both the educational side and maintaining some QP workers and balancing out, a project. Of course, it would be with the NDTA teacher on support and stuff because that's part of their mandate, but in conjunction of all three, doing the electrical work and doing the rest and expanding, because they already do some small work, but this would be of the larger project. And if the feasibility of it's there, I think it's a win-win for both parties.
Okay, great. Trustee Berzer?
I'm good with the recommendation.
Second.
Okay. Would you like to speak to it at all?
I think it's a great opportunity to put back some work in for our community, for our QP staff who have faced a lot of cuts in the last few years. I think it's a terrific opportunity for our students in CTC. I just think it's all around a really great concept. And you could be explored.
Great. Superintendent?
Yeah, thanks Rob for bringing it forward, and I just suggest that we can do some work around that and have it reflected in the budget as we bring it forward. And certainly a portion, may be something that is very doable. I know that all of a sudden we need 10 more portables. I mean, the load may be too great, but we can certainly take a look at that and have it reflected as a budget initiative for next year.
Sure. Any other comments or ideas? Trustee Higginson?
I'll just comment on, I was fortunate enough to be in one of the ones in Victoria, and they're so bright. They're really beautiful spaces. There's, I think, calling them, I think they call them, what do they call them? Learning studios or something,
Yeah,
which
right.
really, because they're not the typical portable. So if this is financially viable or even just a teeny bit more expensive, I just really think that they're a much nicer learning environment.
Good. Trustee Byrne?
Well, most of the band shells that are in the district were built by QP staff, and they're still standing. And that was like 25 years ago, I think most of them were built. This will make us much more flexible, I think, much more nimble, able to respond to sudden increases in population, with facilities that are durable and light, rather than those mold-infested portables that we sometimes encounter in our district and other districts. So I fully support this.
Great. Well, and I want to thank Rob and his team for bringing it forward. I think it is a positive win-win situation. So great idea, and thank you for bringing it forward. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. There's no, for your information, are there any questions? Seeing and hearing none, looking for an adjournment? Mover and seconder, all those in favor? We are now unconstituted. Thank you very much, everyone.
How about I call you?
Sure.
You're around tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll be around in the morning. If I don't till 3, pretty good till I think till about 2 o'clock.